Okay, welcome to ELF Center 3 for Rocks and Minerals, and Center 3 is called Rock Riddles. And students are going to use riddles and investigative procedures to identify groups that rocks come from. And there are three, before you do that though, you want to, when you start the center out, reiterate to the students, to the class, that the rock samples are borrowed from the museum and that there are numbers on them that need to stay on them. That helps us get them back into the proper containers, and that they just need to be respectful and be really careful with them as they do their investigations. To include breaking the samples. In Center 3, there's highlighted, it says, please don't let students break the samples, even though this is sometimes helpful when identifying rocks and minerals. And that is helpful, but these samples are not to be broken. Moving along, you're going to introduce students to three really important terms: sedimentary rock, metamorphic rock, and igneous rock. And in this center there will be a quick guide to these types of rocks to help you introduce that to them. So I'm just going to read this to you guys. Geologists classify rocks in three groups according to major earth processes that form them. The three groups are igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. Igneous rocks are formed from melted rock that's cooled and solidified. So obsidian would be an example of an igneous rock, and that's in our samples. Sedimentary rocks are formed at the surface, either in water or land. They're layered accumulations of fragments of rocks, minerals, and animal or plant matter. So this sandstone is an example of a sedimentary rock, and a really neat example is number 26, which I believe is fossiliferous limestone. So we have some neat examples. Metamorphic rocks are rocks that have been changed from one kind of rock to another by intense heat or pressure or both. Marble is a good example of that rock. So what you're going to do is talk to the kids about, as they identify these, think about what process might have formed that rock. And start, rather than identifying that this is specifically called marble, we're going to identify what type of, how it might have been formed. Is it igneous? Does it look like it has volcanic origins? This one doesn't. And so you'll start discussing that with them. And in order to do that in a really kind of fun way, we have the rock riddles. So, you're going to open up your tub of rocks and put them out so that the kid there in front of the kids, each pair of kids will get one tub of rocks. Is that right?
No, there's enough for each kid.
Actually, there are enough for each
There's
kid.
7 bins, so each kid could have a tub. Wow.
Each kid could have their own tub. That is pretty cool. So sedimentary rock riddles, you're going to, with the younger kids, you're going to read through this and ask them, for instance, to find a rock that feels like sandpaper. So they'll go through and pick up rocks and go, oh, this one kind of feels like sandpaper. And we're going to put that in its own pile. Next, you're going to find a speckled rock. Well, there's a couple of speckled rocks. So maybe you scoot those over there. So probably we're looking for this one.
Can we find out by looking at the key, Emmy?
You can find out by looking at the key, and it will tell you. As the person, as the coordinator, as the parent volunteer, you have a key so you can guide the direction that it's going. But I would suggest letting them spend some time kind of making these piles of the different rocks and then go through. Further on down, it asks you to find a rock that fizzles when hydrochloric acid is dropped on it. Now, the kids aren't going to do that. You're going to do that with them. So once they have what they think are their piles of rocks, and there may be leftover rocks that they couldn't figure out where they go, then you can start doing tests like that, like does a penny scratch it? Some of the tests that they've may or may not have already run in Center 2. So, they'll sort the rocks, they'll group them, eventually they'll hopefully be in a group of sedimentary rocks, a group of metamorphic rocks, and a group of igneous rocks. The older students can probably read these rock riddles themselves and sort independently or with a friend. And some rocks may fit into more than one category as you go through it, so that's another important use for this key. Included also in here are just some more background on what metamorphic and sedimentary
Can you hold those up for me?
and igneous rocks are.
So might you want to start with this information? Metamorphic,
Yes.
and what's the next one? Sedimentary. Yes,
And igneous.
and you also have these handy handouts
And
right
then there
here.
are all these handouts.
Sedimentary rocks.
Sedimentary rocks, this is really good visual. Metamorphic rocks shows the process, talks about the process of change that has to go on for one rock, kind of rock to become another kind. And then igneous rocks. And then another just example of what the acid test is for.
The acid test. So you might want to start with those, just very in-depth description of sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous rocks.
Yeah.
And then get the rocks out. And
Yeah.
maybe the bigger grades, you could do one container of rocks per student. Otherwise, you might want to pair off, right? It might be,
That would be, I would recommend that, because then they can be investigating together and discussing it with each other. So I think that if that was me, I would kind of go by the group and by the success rate of them all having their own or sharing. I think when you're doing it like specifically with the kindergartners, it might be a good idea to maybe to just get one set out and have the whole group go through and say, well, which of these rocks, everybody feel a rock, does it feel like sandstone? Everybody pick up a rock, does it float in this water that we happen to have?
oh, that one sunk. Do we have any that float?
It's supposed to float.
Was it?
That's pumice, it's supposed
No,
to float.
that's pumice. Well,
Let's try this one.
oh, that sunk too.
Not floating.
Whoopsie, sorry, people.
Not floating. Alas, well, you could talk about that it might float in a larger body of water. It would certainly float more than this heavy rock over
Yeah, so mostly we're talking about the heaviness of a rock
here. So,
and the porosity, probably.
yes. Let's see. The overall picture that you want them to get is that this is another way that geologists classify rocks, and it's how we know the story of rocks. And a really great final illustration for the story of rocks are these tubs that show the process of the sedimentary process.
So we have big rocks breaking down into little rocks, into littler bits of rocks, all the way down into a fine-grained sand. So this talks about kind of a little bit of a sedimentary rock cycle.
So included in this bin would be the sediments of the sedimentary rocks, 7 boxes of rocks, 7 containers of rocks, which all need to go back so that every single one has one of each kind of rock, a container for water for the floating test, some pennies to be able to do that test, hand lenses, which are on their way. They'll look like that. Dun, dun, dun.
Ta-da!
And the handouts that help you explain and discuss what igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks are. And then the rock riddles, the mystery, the tricky mystery way for helping them decode what rocks are what, and of course, the always helpful key.
What is in the little manila envelope? Is that for the center?
It is, if you want to go a step further, if you're just out of this world, you could have the kids, once you identify that, for instance, that's obsidian, you could find the corresponding label and put it with it so that they can just have another way of absorbing that they've identified that they know the name of that.
Will the number keys be on the backs of those cards?
Yeah, the number keys will be on the back. of
And
these
then they can
cards.
also, I see there's one for igneous, one for sedimentary, and one for metamorphic, so they could characterize them and,
So you could, yeah, you could, as you sort these out, you could go, all of these rocks are igneous rocks in this pile over here. And that would be a much simpler way.
you could even lay out the igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary at the beginning and when they're sorting too, if you wanted to.
You sure could.
Okay.
Whatever way helps you make this illustrate the rock groups and makes it, just give it another level for absorbing would be terrific. That's why there's just different methods of doing that that are all in here for you to attack it the best way you know how.
Yay.
So, and of course, there are some lovely books about metamorphic, igneous, and sedimentary rocks.
Great.
If there's questions, like Carrie said, give us an email.
MitchellElf@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you.